Hello friends, welcome to a little presentation on narrative point of view, in which we'll look at who tells the story and understand a little bit better why it matters. So let's take a look at these three images, these three people or groups of people, and figure out who they're talking about. This woman in the upper left looks like she came from some 1950s TV comedy, is currently referring back to herself. This guy in the middle, probably recognize him as Uncle Sam, who is famous for saying, "I want you to join the US Army." So he's talking to you. And this woman here in the lower right is telling this second person here, the man she's engaged in conversation with, about these other two people. So she's talking about them. So point of view refers to the perspective from which a narrator, anyone telling a story of any kind, talks about the people in the story, those other people or themselves. So narrative point of view is the perspective, the stance from which a narrator, any storyteller, tells a story. So why does it matter when we're looking at fiction in particular? Well, the point of view from which we observe, we, the readers or listeners, observe the details of the story is important in shaping our response, how we feel or think about the details in it. So point of view can shape the reader's response. You can tell the same story from different points of view, and the effect on the reader of the point of view can alter our perception, can change our perception of what happened or what matters in the story. For example, from our outside point of view, looking at this beautiful lion from a distance, you can just see that she is beautiful and noble and probably ferocious, but we're not threatened by her. But if you were that gazelle being chased by that lioness, you'd probably have a different point of view. And by the way, it's worth noting, these ducks and geese or whatever in the background, they're not involved at all. They're kind of like us. They're just bystanders. So the point of view affects how you feel and think about the events of the story. In talking about point of view, it will be useful to be aware of a distinction between two different kinds of perspectives, from outside the character's mind and from inside the character's mind. Objective is the term we use to refer to any situation viewed from the outside, without any emotional connection, any personal feelings coming into it. So kind of like a camera or a snapshot view. Subjective refers to all those ways of looking at an experience from the inside, from inside your own experience or from inside another person's experience, with all the feelings and associations and memories that go with that. So objective simply means viewed from the outside. Subjective means viewed from the inside. So let's explore these different points of view that are available to storytellers by telling 6 very, very simple short stories. Story number 1, we'll call it first person. Here's the entire story. On the first day of school, I felt nervous. That's it. Not a very exciting story, but one that probably many of you can feel a connection with. The narrator, notice, is telling us the story in his or her own voice. So the narrator uses I, me, and mine, and myself as pronouns to refer to the person the story is about. So first person is narration or storytelling in the voice of a character involved in the action. Notice, by the way, it doesn't have to be the main character. There are plenty of stories that are told by a supporting character about the main character. In contrast, that is story number 2, second person. Here's the entire story. You didn't know your way around the school. You can tell this is a sequel to story number 1, but instead of the student whose first day of school it is being the storyteller, it's somebody outside telling the story to the character. So second person narration is narration about the person being addressed, using you, in other words, you, your, and yourself. It's pretty rare in fiction. You come across it now and then, but not very often. Think of choose your own adventure stories. Those use second person. It's more common in poetry. And of course, it's common in speech. Story number 3. We'll call it the third person objective or the camera view story. Here's the entire story. Fred entered room 307 and sat down at a table near the back. We call this one objective because we're just viewing the actions of the character from outside. We have no idea what Fred is thinking or what anybody else is thinking or feeling. We're just observing the action. So this is third person objective. Third person means referring to, using pronouns, for example, or names that refer to other characters. Not oneself, not the person you're talking to, but a third character or person. By the way, this is a sequel to stories number 1 and 2, so we find out that the main character's name in story number 1 and number 2 is Fred. So third person objective is narration from completely outside all the characters' points of view. It simply looks at what and records what they did and said. And the only way we can know what they feel is if they talk about what they feel or if they show it in their facial expressions. But the narrator doesn't tell us directly. That's contrasted with story number 4, third person limited. Here's the story. He, we're still talking about Fred here, felt certain all the upperclassmen were against him, but he was determined not to show any signs of weakness. Notice Fred feels something, and the narrator is telling us what he feels. Not Fred, he's not telling us directly, the narrator is telling us. So the narrator is kind of a mind reader, but he only tells us one character's point of view. That's why we call this the limited point of view. So the narration shows the character's point of view, but not in that character's voice. Story number 5, third person omniscient, also known as all-knowing. Omniscient comes from ancient Greek, meaning all-knowing. So the narrator knows everything. Here's the story. Most of the upperclassmen did not even notice Fred, but some of those who did felt a pang of sympathy, remembering how stressful their first days of high school had been. So here, we aren't being told how Fred feels about the situation at the moment, but we are being told how other characters, and more than one of them, how they feel about the situation. Some don't even notice them. Others actually feel some sympathy. So we call this style of narration omniscient or all-knowing because the narrator seems to know what all the characters or any characters are thinking and can tell us more than one character's inner thoughts, but not in their own voice. So still uses he, she, and they as the main pronouns. And now, finally, story number 6, the conclusion, which really, as you'll see, is just combining all the stories into one. Chapter 1, on the first day of school, I felt nervous. Chapter 2, you didn't know your way around the building. Chapter 3, Fred entered room 307 and sat down. Chapter 4, he felt certain the upperclassmen had it out for him. Chapter 5, most of the upperclassmen did not even notice Fred, but some felt sympathy. I did a little condensing there. But notice here, we get multiple chapters, and each chapter is told in a different point of view. So that's shifting, meaning the narrator, or the narrative, alters its point of view from chapter to chapter, or from paragraph to paragraph, or sometimes from sentence to sentence. It jumps around, hops around. By the way, the different points of view are more commonly used in different kinds of stories. The objective point of view is kind of difficult to use. It's hard to pull off in a longer story, so we usually only find that in short stories. The limited point of view, third person limited, is found pretty often in short stories and occasionally in longer works, novels. But the omniscient and the shifting points of view are more commonly found in longer fiction, in novels. So objective usually just in short stories, limited mostly in short stories, sometimes in novels, omniscient and shifting mostly in longer fiction. Because in shorter works, if you jump around a lot from different characters' points of view, it's kind of hard to really get a consistent effect. And that's what short stories are usually aiming to do. But longer novels may give you the room to explore different characters' points of view. So quick review. First person in the voice of a character, second person directed at a character, using you, third person, about the character's actions from the outside, limited, describes one character's inner thoughts, omniscient shows multiple characters' inner thoughts, and shifting can jump around. First person, third person limited, and omniscient all use subjective point of view. They all will give you the inner thoughts of characters. Shifting may use subjective point of view, and usually does. Usually some of the points of view in a shifting narrative will be, usually, for example, you get two different chapters or two different narrators going back and forth, passing the story back and forth between them, so each of them is being subjective, talking about and expressing her or his own inner feelings about the experience. So that's it for the kinds of narrative point of view. Thanks for watching.